Thank you all for being here. I'm Carol Newcomb-Aludo. I'm the chair of CMC's Board of Trustees. It's great to see everyone here. I think we have over 400 people today. Today's forum is our annual Blue Chip Economic Forum, presented with support from Dispatch Media Group, BDO, Corner-Kokosing, Fifth Third Bank, and in partnership with Leadership Columbus. Each are represented here today by many guests and associates. Won't you please help me thank them and to welcome Paul Weber, Senior Vice President and Director of Wealth Management Advisors at Fifth Third Private Bank, to introduce our forum. Thank you. And
Thank you so much. Thank you, Carol. Fifth Third is very, very proud to sponsor this event one more time. I think this is our fifth year maybe of doing this. We're also extremely proud to support the Columbus Metropolitan Club and all the great conversations that you all have over the course of the year. Today, we are going to do the Blue Chip Economic Forecast, and I always look forward to hearing the owner of Regionomics, Bill LaFayette, give his update. But we also have here with us Professor Emeritus and former director former department chair of finance at The Ohio State University, Stephen Buser, who's here today for the first time with us, and our host a journalist at the Columbus Dispatch, Mark Williams, is going to be here to kind of do a question and answer session with the group. But Bill, I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk a little bit about this new tax plan that's coming out and how it's going to help the city of Columbus and businesses and all of us in this room. So why don't you give us kind of a little bit of an update on that for us?
Well, thanks for the setup, Paul. Happy New Year to all of you, and thank you all for braving the polar vortex or the bomb cyclone or whatever this is. As always, my thanks to CMC for having me back for another year and all the sponsors. I'm especially excited this year to welcome Steve Buser to share thoughts on the national and international economies. As Paul said, Steve is Professor Emeritus of Finance at OSU, but more to the point, he was one of my teachers when I was in the doctoral program there and spoke soothingly to me when I started freaking out over Ito's lemma and stochastic calculus. I'm very appreciative of that. And back for another year is my friend, our moderator, Mark Williams of the Dispatch. This is sounding like a broken record. Central Ohio had another good year in 2017. As of now, it looks like we gained 2% in total employment, just over 21,000 net new jobs. U.S. employment was up 1.5% compared to R2. Ohio gained only 0.9%. But if you pull Central Ohio employment out of the total, growth for the rest of the state was only 0.7%, less than half the national average. Employment started growing after the recession locally and nationally 8 years ago last month. Since then, our region has added more than 177,000 net new jobs. In December, we had just over 900,000 jobs. Sometime this year, we're going to cross the 1.1 million mark. 2018 is going to be our 9th annual consecutive year of growth. That growth should again be better than average. I'm forecasting more than 19,000 net new jobs, a growth of 1.8%. U.S. employment should grow by about 1.4%. I'm doing something a little bit different in the forecast this year. As long as I've been doing these forecasts, I've been whining about the unreliability of the employment estimates that are given by the government for me to work with. For the last few years, I've coped with this by doing two separate forecasts. One based on the unreliable numbers you see in the forecast document, which are as of now available through November. But the other forecast is based on numbers that are much more reliable, but are only available through this past June. So I've been using that second forecast to figure out how far off the unreliable numbers might be and factor that into the forecast that you see. This year I've taken it one step further. I've used the second forecast to adjust some of the 2017 employment totals in the forecast that I'm releasing. My second forecast suggested that the estimate of 2017 total employment is really pretty close, but some of the sector totals are way, way off. My guesses of what the actual totals might be are shown in the forecast in the table in blue. This, of course, gives me yet one more opportunity to be wrong. I'm hoping, though, that it might reflect the ultimate reality that we eventually see better than my forecast has in the past. Speaking of being wrong, though, I need to pause here and do penance for last year's forecast. My forecasts have actually been pretty close over the last 7 or 8 years, but last year's forecast was not. I thought growth would slow, and I was right. But growth slowed a little, and I predicted that it would slow a lot. I forecast a gain of 16,000 jobs, or 1.5%. As I said a moment ago, we got 21,000 jobs, or 2%. I was seriously low only in my predictions for government and retail. Most other sectors were too low as well, though. In my defense, the preliminary, unreliable numbers last year at this time were showing a significant slowdown in Columbus employment taking hold, which, as it turned out, was not really happening. But I guess the point is, if I have to be wrong, I would much rather be wrong this way than the other way. So let me turn now to what might wind up being the most significant economic story of 2018 and beyond, the Smart Columbus Initiative. The Smart City Challenge was a $40 million U.S. Department of Transportation grant that invited mid-sized cities across the country to develop ideas for an integrated transportation system to solve practical transportation problems, essentially to define what being a smart transportation city might mean. 78 cities submitted proposals. Out of those 78, there were 7 finalists: Austin, Columbus, Denver, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Portland, and San Francisco. We won. So CMC had a forum on Smart Columbus on August 3rd, 2016, which you can watch on YouTube. And if you're following me on my Facebook page, I'll post a link to that forum. That $40 million that came from the USDOT was supplemented with $10 million from Paul Allen's Vulcan Group and more than $500 million in local matching resources and counting. One big part of the initiative, actually funded by a separate grant, is to make Route 33 from Dublin through Union County a smart corridor. Sensors on the road and in vehicles will allow snowplows, emergency vehicles, and school buses to talk to one another and to talk to public people watching the road. Eventually, that smart corridor is going to allow driverless cars and platooning trucks. Union County has developable land ready to be filled with companies wanting to get in on that action. Some of the other innovations being talked about include streetlights that are motion activated to conserve energy, an initiative to triple the number of electric vehicle chargers and make electric vehicles widespread in Columbus, including in government fleets. a universal card that will allow everybody, including individuals who are unbanked, access to Coda, Kogo Bikes, Car2Go, and Uber. That's going to create access to jobs and medical services for people who don't have it now. That's a really big deal in a neighborhood like Linden, where the unemployment rate is sky high and infant mortality is 4 times the national average. This sort of initiative is going to allow people access to jobs and medical resources that they didn't have before. Another proposal is a series of workforce initiatives that are going to provide the training to help workers access the jobs related to the Smart Columbus initiative, including jobs that require technical training but not college degrees. A major benefit of the initiative is that it can make us an international center for development and deployment of smart mobility technologies. It gives us access to experts who, before this initiative started, would never have given us the time of day. And it could attract some of these experts actually to relocate here. It could lead to some of those experts and some local people developing the expertise to build companies to develop and commercialize these technologies. So pay close attention to this initiative over the next year. It looks like things are about to pop. And I'm done. For now.
First, I'd like to say thanks again to the CMC for having me back for this year's Blue Chip Forecast, which I am unofficially calling 3 Bald Guys Talking. So for our program, I want to follow up with Bill with a couple questions on his forecast and then get Steve into the game. Bill, your forecast for the Central Ohio economy continues to be bright. When you look out at the year ahead, are there various sectors of the economy that you see doing better and some that aren't doing so well?
Mm-hmm. Well, construction has been going particularly crazy. In part, I think that's because it did so poorly before the recession. We had very, very slow growth in construction employment, and all of a sudden people are thinking, well, gee whiz, we're growing 1.1, 1.2% per year. We're going to need some new buildings. Population growth is continuing faster than the national average, so construction over the long term is a pretty good bet. Unfortunately, though, this is one of the industries where the workforce shortage is causing real problems. Transportation, distribution, logistics is continuing to look very good. Financial activities are looking good. Government should do better than average in Central Ohio. I've talked before about the tendency of the state to locate more than our fair share of jobs in Central Ohio. We should continue to do okay. We're getting more than our fair share, and that should continue in 2018, not so much elsewhere in the state. Last year at this time, one of the things that threw my forecast off was my big worry about the state budget and its impact on local government employment. That seems not to have really taken hold. So I'm predicting much, much better growth next year. Healthcare was a big reason why we did so much better than the national average early in the expansion. But after 15 years of above average growth, it's starting to look like the growth will be average, which still is not bad. It's just not quite as good. There's really no bad sector. I'm a little bit worried about corporate headquarters employment. I'm worried about administrative support employment. Those are subsets of business services. They haven't been growing particularly well, as far as I can tell, and that just bears watching in 2018.
Our housing market here in Central Ohio has been absolutely on fire. Prices continue to go up, and we're at record prices. Inventories continue to be tiny. We are going to see interest rates probably go up this year, and that may affect that. But is there anything that in your forecast that you're seeing with home prices and what they may be doing this year?
Well, house price appreciation for a change has been greater than the national average in this expansion. We have one of the highest appreciation rates in the Midwest. I look here at not the NAR data, the National Association of Realtors. I look at the price index of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which is a much better way to gauge house price appreciation. Prices are up 7.7% in Central Ohio over the last year, 43% since 2011, both above average, both real standouts in the Midwest. As of now, we're still affordable. The typical house in Franklin County is 21% cheaper than it is nationally. But obviously, we can't keep this above average growth going and not start to see the kind of affordability problems that are already affecting the lower end of the market. Going forward, interest rates will rise. That may or may not have much of an impact, especially given the fact that interest rates may not rise by much.
Yeah. Finally, a quick question about the state economy, Bill. As your handout shows, and what we've seen is that job creation statewide has started to slow the last couple of years. And outside of Columbus and really Cincinnati and some other cities, we really haven't seen a lot of growth in some of our other metros. And any signs that things will get better elsewhere?
Well, if by better you mean growth, there will in most places be growth. If by better you mean growth more than we're seeing now, I don't think so. Because just because of the slow population growth that is affecting the ability of the many, many companies that serve a local market to grow, in part because of the workforce challenge, the mismatch of skills and the employer needs, and in part just because manufacturing is so important in Ohio. Manufacturing employment in Ohio as a whole is half again as much as you would expect in an economy Ohio's size. In some smaller metros, rural areas, it's 2 or 3 times what you would expect. Now, there's nothing wrong with manufacturing itself. The problem is the transformation that's been going on in manufacturing over the last few decades, where you're switching from labor base to a capital base.
Okay, Steve, let's open up a can of worms. Congress and the President have just enacted the most significant tax reform we've seen in the past 30 years. The reforms include tax cuts that will add up to about $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. About 2/3 of the tax cut will go to businesses, and the rest of it will go to us. When it's all said and done, I suspect most of us in this room will get a tax break. Some probably will be paying a little bit more. The national economy has been okay since the recession ended, but not great, not the kind of growth that we're accustomed to seeing. We still have had solid job growth. Unemployment rate is very low. And if we aren't at full employment, we're pretty close. We have talked about income inequality in the past with this group, and some of my colleagues at the Dispatch have written about this extensively. There's been a lot of chatter about what's going to happen with the corporate tax breaks, whether it's going to be used for dividends or buybacks, or whether we're going to see more of the kind of thing like what our sponsor, Fifth Third, has done today by raising minimum wage to $15 an hour and giving $1,000 bonuses to workers. So what do you think, Steve? Will this tax package give our economy the boost that we need, or is it just a short-term bump that will just create more trouble down the road?
Well, it's a good question, and I don't want to pretend to have an exact answer for you, but I can say this, that corporations have a duty to their shareholders. So sometimes they're criticized, I think unfairly, for doing what their fiduciary duty tells them they must do. So if they're going to raise wages, or if they're going to hire more workers, they have to have a good reason for that. It's not something that you just make up. The use of cash traditionally in the last few years has been predominantly to increase dividends and buy back shares of stock to increase the value of the remaining stocks. And that's what their duty to their shareholders is. So again, we can't be shocked when a company does what it says it's going to do. Fifth Third is an exception. I would ask them to explain why this is in the best interest of their shareholders. Now, perhaps it's part marketing. It might be that if you do this, it will make your company look good. That makes sense to me. Again, I don't want to pretend to answer the question for them. If you hire more workers, is that something that you would do? Does your business need more workers? Again, the downside of that is, well, you're going to pay more. What are your shareholders going to get for that? So again, not to dismiss the question, but I don't have an exact answer for you. The tax code is very complicated, 1,000-page document, which I have not read. There are also many unanswered questions in the existing document. For example, just last night I heard that certain states, including California and perhaps New York, are considering changing the rules so that if you make a charitable, quote, charitable gift to the state that you live in, they will credit that against your taxes that you owe. And therefore, there's an end run around the elimination or the cap on the state and local income tax. So that's, we'll see if the courts consider that appropriate. They may throw it out. I don't know. Again, I'm not a legal scholar, so I don't have a pretense of an answer for that. But we will see about what's going on with that. It is a complicated measure, the tax code, and I have great concerns about it, but I'll keep those to myself.
So there was some interesting chatter on at our table here about charitable giving under the tax law. There's some concern among a lot of charities that we as consumers will have less of a desire to give to our local charities because we won't be able to deduct this because of the changes in deductions under the tax law. Is that something that we should be talking about and should be worried about, or is it just too soon to know?
Well, again, a little too soon to know, but I think that the concern is warranted. And the concern is that if we are going to double the standard deduction up to $24,000 per couple, then what's that going to do to charitable contributions? I mean, you're still allowed, and they're not capped charitable contributions per se. So if you itemize, you're still going to get the full tax benefit on that. But fewer people are going to itemize. In fact, that's one of the specific objectives of the new tax change, is to, quote, simplify it. I don't think a 1,000-page document qualifies as simplifying anything. But under that, they're hoping, they said that you could fill out a lot of people are going to be able to fill out their income tax on a little piece of paper, one piece of paper. I don't think that's going to happen, but if it were to happen, then you'd say, well, what's this do to people that used to give to charities, and what's So maybe some people are still going to contribute to charities. Hopefully, that's the case. But we don't know. I mean, the tax incentive could go away. It's going to be greatly diminished. And that is a concern to me. If I were working with a charitable organization, such as Ohio State University, that would be a concern.
More broadly, I'm sorry.
Oh, I wonder, though, if maybe that argument isn't letting the tail wag the dog to a certain extent. I wonder why people give to charities. Is it to get a deduction on their taxes, or is it to benefit a cause that they believe in? I'm a newly minted president of a small charity, Employment for Seniors, and I certainly hope that I'm right. Like you say,
I hope he's right as well.
We'll find out.
Yes, and be clear, I was just saying that the tax incentive goes away. I'm not saying that charitable gifts go away. I have no forecast on that at all.
More broadly, Steve, what's your outlook this year for the national and international economies?
Well, hopefully it will be good, and hopefully we'll have a positive growth if Bill were applying this. I will say that we are long overdue for a recession. Since 1950, we've had 11 recessions. Now, if I were teaching this as a course, I'd make all of you do the math. But I think you would find out that that means roughly once, a little over 6 years, you can expect a recession. We are now entering the 11th year since we've had the last recession. So we are overdue. Now, I'm not forecasting a recession in the coming year, but I can't say that I'll be surprised if it happens. And I think we have to prepare ourselves if that happens. Now, in response to recession, there are only two options. One option is lower interest rates, but they're all already historically low levels. So I don't see that as an option. The other is to increase government expenditures to stimulate the economy. But we've just slashed tax revenues, and if the economy is shrinking as well, then the concerns about tax losses are going to be even larger. Mm-hmm. And I think it's unlikely that many state and local governments will be able to stimulate the economy, much less the federal government. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying that I'm not predicting a recession, but I am saying that I'm extremely troubled by the fact that we have said, oh, we don't have to worry about recessions anymore.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, we do. We do have to worry about them, and that's exactly my concern. And if the last time we were going in something like this, the Federal Reserve pushed up interest rates aggressively, and they continued to do that going into the recession. And all they could do then is drop the interest rates again and encourage people to borrow to spend, corporations and individuals. And that got us through the recession, but it did not do very well. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a very long, prolonged, stagnant recovery and lower than expectations. Well, why is it lower than expectations? It's because predominantly we've had to rely just on people who borrowed the money. We lower the interest rates, encourage you to borrow some money, and all right, you borrow some money, you spend it, but there's a limitation on how the impact on the economy will be. If you want a stronger impact, you have to provide a fiscal stimulus. I think every economist would agree with that strategy in response to recession. But if that's no longer on the table, then I'm going to say, well, what are we doing, and what is our strategy? Hopefully we have one. I don't know what it is, but hopefully somebody out there is thinking of something.
So we're getting close to time for Q&A. So don't be shy. Step up to the microphone. I just have one more final topic I want to cover. And I think I'm speaking now as a citizen of this country as opposed to a reporter, and that's regarding some of the issues we're taking with regulations in our economy. I know that during the run-up to the recession, you can look at a lot of different things and see what went wrong. As a result, we've enacted a number of regulations meant to prevent some of the kind of loose things that we did that were major factors. So the bankers I talk to regularly now complain about how it's too tough, or not too tough, but it's just a lot more stringent regulation than what they've seen in the past and what they prefer. But we know that we've had some very dangerous mortgage lending going up into the recession. Alan Greenspan has taken his fair share of heat after the recession. And this is the thing that was troubling to me. This is a quote he gave during some Senate testimony a few years ago. Those of us who have looked to the self-interest, if lending institutions to protect shareholders' equity, myself included, are in a state of shocked belief. Now we have a new administration that seems much more interested in rolling back regulations than the prior administration. My concern is, are we getting set up to where we may have the kind of problems that could lead us into taking too much risk again, and that ultimately creating problems for us in the economy down the road? That's for both of you guys, by the way.
Okay, and my answer to that question will be yes. Regulations are disruptive and they are bad, but the absence of regulation is also bad. In particular, when you're dealing with a heavily regulated industry like banking, and you have government insurance for those banks, we're encouraging them to take big gambles. And if you allow them to make bets on non-specific things, you have to expect them to do that, because essentially they're playing the game of, well, if I take a big gamble, heads, my bank wins, tails, the government loses. And so you're giving them an incentive. Again, if you have a duty to your shareholders, you're saying, well, gee, we have a duty to do this. And again, we were shocked. Federal Reserve members were even shocked that banks behaved in a way that, yes, we encouraged them to take these big gambles. Why? Because if they didn't take them, they would not be doing their duty to their shareholders. So how can we be surprised when they're doing exactly the thing that we are encouraging them to do? So regulation is bad. Yes, it restricts things out there, but the absence of regulation, particularly when you have an industry that's funded by government funds and it's government insured, then you have a big problem.
I think everybody agrees that there is a happy mean of regulation. The problem is that nobody agrees what that happy mean is.
They just think it's mean, but not the
very mean. But the real question is, we have these very, very sophisticated, ridiculously sophisticated lending instruments. We had those before the recession. People just didn't understand them. And people bought houses on that basis. Nobody understood them. They were unpriceable. And so it's that kind of abuse of the system, I'll call it for what it is, an abuse of the consumer that we really need to put a rein on.
Yeah, and I won't even call it abuse. I think that is predictable.
It is predictable.
And if you're operating in the best interest of your shareholders and you've given a very powerful incentive to engage in this behavior, we had what we called liar loans. That if you wanted to fill out a traditional application, we would coach you to say, well, we're going to lend you 2.5 times whatever you tell us is your income. And we're not going to check on what the income is. So if you want to buy a $250,000 house, you have to tell us that you earn $100,000 a year, and we're not going to check it. So you coach them to how, not just let them lie, but you tell them what the answer is. And then we're shocked when people did exactly what we encouraged them to do. And if you were a conservative bank that did not engage in that activity, all your customers went next door to another bank where they could get these loans.
Yeah.
So again, we can't fault the industry for, and I don't think it's an abuse. I disagree with my former student there on that one.
It won't be the first time.
But if I give you an incentive to do something and you do it, I can't call that an abuse. I have to call that what I think it is. It's predictable, and that's the way the system is structured.
Okay.
Okay. We'll leave it there. It is, of course, the CMC's tradition to take audience questions. So please, if you would, state your name and ask your question, and of course, avoid any long editorial comments. First question.
Good afternoon. My name is Hugo Trucks. This question is for the whole panel. Politicians of all ilk recite the mantra of jobs, jobs, jobs. My question is, what effect do politicians and government really have on the creation of jobs? Thank you.
Well, I'm not a politician, but I will weigh in on that as best I can. I think that is a marketing tool for a politician. We want to create jobs, and we want them to be high-paying jobs. Now, if you want that to be high-paying jobs, then you do certain things with respect to trade. We haven't talked about trade yet, and so I don't want to go into great detail there unless you have a follow-up question. But you have a very different approach if you just want to make things cheap. We used to call gains from trade getting more stuff than you had to give up. Just like if you were a professional football team and you traded with another team, you'd want to get more than you gave up. We're now in a world where that's turned on its head, and now you want to give more than you get back. We're criticizing China for the fact that they're giving us tremendous value at very low cost. They've artificially increased the value of the Chinese currency by a factor of 4 relative to the US dollar. So they can make things very, very cheap, and they sell it to us at 25% of their cost. And we're shocked that even President Trump manufactures all his goods in China. I mean, how did this come about? Well, that's the game they were playing. Now, that turns out to be bad for jobs, but good for consumption. Do you know what, by the way, the price of 1 gallon of gas would be if we hadn't manipulated the currency? You know what it would be going for right now? $8 a gallon. So we only have to pay $2 a gallon for all the processing and stuff, which is less than what you pay for some water, a bottle of water. It just doesn't make any sense to me that, again, we're shocked when 2 plus 2, it still equals 4. And I'll let you add to that.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that point. In addition, I think that government doesn't create jobs as much as it facilitates job creation. And that can be a worker training initiative that's government financed. It can be perhaps incentives for companies to expand their employment, assuming that it makes economic sense to do so. So for all those reasons, I think government does not create jobs. Government creates the environment where jobs can be created.
Next question.
Hello, I'm Tony Guglielmato. Thank you for your presentation today. I wish I could think of an international trade or employment question, but I can't. I'm going to take it way local. We're on the verge of losing our local soccer team, and I'd like to know whether or not there is some economic incentive to keep them in Columbus. Thank you.
Well, there certainly is. The Crew is a business, and if the Crew moves to Austin, then we have lost an employer, a major employer. And it's more than that, though. The community has an emotional investment in this particular employer. And when they when they relocate to Austin, basically telling us, oh, Columbus, you're not good enough, we're going to Austin, which is better. That really is adding insult to injury. But at its heart, the economic impact is really, you could analyze it as you would any business in the same general industry with the same employment level. It will cost us jobs, and it will also cost us tourist dollars.
And I will add to that that Bill and I worked on a project in Cincinnati where they were trying to get a professional soccer team. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked at how powerful the economic analysis was in favor of who cares about soccer? I mean, I'm a football guy. And, but when we ran the numbers, or when Bill ran the numbers, and I signed it.
Not entirely true.
It was remarkable how big the impact would be on Cincinnati. Very favorable. So there was a net gain if they were to get a team. So I've not looked at the numbers here, but I'm shocked that there wasn't a more aggressive response to keeping them.
Well, he's going to do what he's going to do.
Next question.
Thank you. Bill Wayhoff. I'm with Steptoe and Johnson PLLC. And as one looks through the tax bill, it is 1,000 pages, but a lot of the sections are very short. They're deleting this and deleting that. It affects a lot of the sections of the code. And so, it may not be quite as long as folks may think. But I wonder if anyone's ever done a study on when they eliminated the deduction for political contributions and whether or not that had an adverse effect on the amount of political contributions. So that's my question.
That's a good question. That would be, I think, a way to look at the charitable deduction. Right. That's an excellent point.
Well, and on the other part of that, though, is that we've certainly seen the rise of charitable foundations that are operating, that are really political groups that are operating under the guise of charities.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of money has gone into that. Next question.
Hi, I'm Warren Fishman. First of all, I want to thank you for this forum. I look forward to it every year, and it's entertaining and sometimes depressing and sometimes uplifting.
Thank you, Warren.
But you touched a little bit on personal economics as far as home mortgages and so on, but the Columbus Dispatch published an article a while back about, it was pretty gloomy, about the personal debt people have, and many people, a huge percentage, have enough personal debt that they have judgments against them. I wonder how that affects the economy. Is that the underlying thing that hasn't hit the wall yet as far as people's personal economic situations?
Well, I'm going to say yes, that is my concern. Mm-hmm. If we had more time, we could go into it in more detail. But yes, when you reduce interest rates, you're literally trying to bribe people into borrowing more and spending. That's the strategy. And when we did not respond to the recession with a fiscal stimulus, that's the only card that we allowed to play in response. And now we're shocked that the economy has grown so slowly after the recession. But again, I think it's a great question, and share your concern. I don't have any insight. Do you have any insight?
I think that one area that people have been talking about a lot is student debt. Student debt is just a real millstone around the neck of the economy. It limits the ability of people starting their career to buy houses, to move out of their parents' basement, to make consumption purchases that normally we would expect them to make. Student loan default rates have been fairly steady. Meanwhile, auto loan default rates are rising a little bit. And so I think that's an ongoing sign of trouble.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We've obviously seen mortgage defaults seem to be very low right now, but with interest rates going up, it makes you wonder. And then on the auto side, the subprime lending seems to be a particular concern. So,
well, I think the real reason why you're seeing such low mortgage default rates are just because interest rates are so low. And if interest rates pick up, you maybe won't necessarily default on your 3.5% mortgage. If mortgage rates are 5 or 6, you're going to do everything in your power to hold on to that. And for the same reason, I think that this inventory problem that we're seeing now in housing may get worse once interest rates start ticking up and people aren't willing to give up their 3.5%, 3.75% mortgages to move into a house where they may have a 4 or 5% mortgage.
so we'll take one more question, and then Carol will take the floor.
Roger Blackwell. One topic I didn't hear discussed was wages, which potentially affects everybody in the room. And the Journal had an article, I think it was 2 days ago, that showed that the cities like Minneapolis, which had the lowest unemployment, had the biggest wage increases. And I was wondering, in your data, have you compared Columbus with the other cities in Ohio with any projections on what might happen to wage increases in the next year? Economic theory would predict unemployment would, when it goes down, wages would go up. If economic theory has any value, which we could question, of course, but have you looked at wages?
I have. I probably don't have time to answer adequately, but the first 6 months of 2017, we saw 4.7% wage growth in Central Ohio, just a touch below the national average and better than it's been since the recovery started. So I think the low unemployment is starting to have an impact. Whether that continues into 2018, my guess is it probably will to a degree, but we'll have to see.
It seems to be a really mixed bag on some of this. The jobs that are really in demand, highly skilled, very technical jobs, seem like that those are the jobs that are getting the wages. A lot of other jobs, wages have been continues to be
As always, you can drown in a river with an average depth of 1 foot.
Indeed.
Since we've been talking about the new tax laws and nonprofits, I want to point out on January 17th, our forum is entitled Nonprofits Navigating a Changing Landscape, so be sure to sign up. Today's forum is our annual Blue Chip Economic Forum, presented by the Dispatch Media Group, and we want to thank you. I hope you enjoyed everything. You can view and share today's forum and all our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our sponsors, and there's 4 of them, so hold your applause. BDO, Fifth Third Bank, Corning-Kokosing, and Dispatch Media Group. Thank you. And our partners, Leadership Columbus, and of course, our speakers, Steve Buser, Bill LaFayette, and Mark Williams. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday. Thank you.